All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a while from the last hear from peers last fall, which is from December, I believe. And now we have on February, we have our first session, supposed to be January 26th, but with the inclement weather, we canceled that sessions and it will be moved on the later session later on this spring. But today we have Dr. Matt McKinney. He's an instructional associate professor in the Department of English, and he is also the director of writing in the disciplines in the University Writing Center. Generative AI has a significant presence in both of these roles. In the rhetoric and composition courses he teaches, he works with students to effectively incorporate generative AI as a tool in developing writing skills. As director of WID, he also works with faculty to help them address and utilize generative AI effectively in their pedagogy. Dr. McKinney, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Armanto. So, as you can see, my talk is titled Prompted to Reflect, Teaching Rhetoric of Style with GenAI. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of how I approached incorporating AI into my pedagogy for this class. I'm going to start with the pedagogical tradition that I found has been really useful in helping me respond to and adapt to the technology as students use it in courses that I've taught before without acknowledging it. And then I'm going to give you some of the basics of English 355 so you can see where I think AI serves a useful purpose and where I still want the students to work on developing writing skills on their own. From there, I'm going to go into some of the questions I discussed with my students about GenAI and got them thinking about what a good and ethical use looks like. And then go into some in-class exercises to show how I thought AI does and doesn't fit into the work I'm asking them to do. Some of that will focus on ways I discourage poor GenAI use in my course design. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a revision exercise I did with the final seminar paper where I use structured prompting. I'll explain what that is if you're not familiar with it and then give you the example I have. And then, of course, we'll have time for Q&A. So if you're not familiar with reflexive pedagogy, it's essentially an offshoot of critical pedagogy. Central to the approach is the idea of the posed problem, where instructors introduce concepts not as fixed content to be memorized, but as open-ended challenges that students explore in context. So rather than telling students exactly how to apply a concept that you're teaching, instructors design experiences or in-class exercises that allow students to make choices, test strategies, and reflect on the outcomes, with the instructor serving as both guide and dialogic partner as they're working on these exercises. Donald Shun, whose work on reflective practice deeply informs this model, describes the process as reflection in action. He argues that educators must be attuned to the dynamic nature of teaching, continuously adjusting based on what emerges in real time. This is especially pertinent in the context of GenAI platforms that continuously update and evolve, and which are also becoming more pervasive in general internet usage, whether we want it or not. I also think it helps me respond to students in the way they prompt these platforms because they always use it differently than I would or how I intend them to use it before we have these conversations. So reflexive pedagogy then requires instructors to honor the choices students make, remain aware of their own authority in the classroom, and strike a balance between support and critique in appraising student work. Students, for their part, are responsible for taking initiative in the learning process, defining how concepts apply to their own goals, reflecting on their needs, and articulating those needs in dialogue with the instructor. So as you can see, Schoen's framework is ideal for framing our responsibilities as instructors in terms of what we can offer and control versus what we can't, and framing students' responsibilities as engaging critically with their own learning and composing processes. So based on that, here are some general principles I've developed whenever I teach a writing course that I formulated while I was teaching this particular section of Rhetoric of Style last fall. I think it's always been important to explain to students why you're asking them to complete a task, why an assignment matters, And I think it's even more important now that Gen AI is potentially a factor in how they do the work. I think that's true whether you're encouraging Gen AI use, you want to explain, here's how I think it can be a helpful tool, and you might consider this going forward. This might be something, say, you're expected to do with whatever field you choose to enter after graduating. Conversely, if you're saying, I don't want you to use Gen AI for this, you need to explain why the skill is valuable, why it's valuable to cultivate it without the technology, and to basically say you want to make sure that you're not setting yourself up to be replaced by the technology, but rather become somebody who can use it effectively. Another takeaway I have is I think whether you have reservations about this technology or not, I certainly do for a number of reasons, mainly because it's not regulated. I do think, nevertheless, that it is important to create the culture of Gen AI use you want students to adopt in your classroom. And you need to not just tell them what that is, you need to practice it and model it for them. My thinking there is if they don't learn how to use it from you, they're going to learn somewhere else. And it may not be a particular culture you like as much or want them to adopt. I highly recommend testing your own assignments outside of class and also with the students so you can demonstrate your familiarity with the technology and they can see your thinking as you engage with it. Beyond that, I think you don't just want to focus on what the technology can do, you want to focus on the ethics surrounding it. I always include a reflective component in Gen AI assignments so that students are put in a position where they have to appraise the output and hopefully develop the habit of engaging with it more critically and not passively. So that established, let me give you some more details about my rhetoric course, English 355. It's mostly English majors, which I think played a role in the kind of feedback and outcomes I had with these exercises. The class focuses on stylistic analysis and imitation of text in American culture. It's thematically based. That's the one that I choose. And we look at stylistic analysis at a range of levels, all the way at the most macro level, looking at cultural contexts that surround a text and how it's composed, all the way down to the sentence level, looking at grammatical construction of sentences, mechanics, and so on. So as you can probably guess, the course is very heavily writing and editing intensive, which means there's a lot of stuff I want the students to develop on their own, but also some areas where I think Gen AI can be effectively incorporated into their processes. And having to distinguish the two was a big challenge throughout this class. So I started off our discussion of AI with a couple of questions to get things going and also just to see what they know about it, what they think about it. So I asked them, from your experience, what do Gen AI platforms like ChatGPT do well and what are they poor at? How do you compare it to your own writing style? Again, these are mostly English majors, so a lot of them see themselves as writers. And so that's going to affect the way they see how this can and can't be incorporated into what they do. The other question I asked them was to reflect on ways you, or if you don't, people in general, use Gen AI outside of school. What are some guiding principles or criteria you use to determine whether Gen AI use is ethical or unethical? Explain. And here were the answers I got. Most of the students focus their answers around AI in the context of school. And so their interpretation of the ethics question was just about cheating in class. A lot of them said basically, if the professor doesn't know you used AI, then it's unethical by default, which I could co-sign. But a few students went beyond that and focused on other things as well. I had a couple of students who were into art or graphic design, and so they talked about the potential loss of creative jobs. A few people talked about the environmental impacts this technology has, specifically water consumption. People expressed concerns about people sharing private or sensitive information with the platforms, the issue of deep fakes and how they can influence socio-political discourse, and then scripting conversations with people. I wasn't quite sure what that meant at first, but a student clarified for me. This is when students interpret, say, a text message they get from a peer, ask ChatGPT to analyze it, and then come up with a response. They were pretty overwhelmingly negative about that. In the middle of our conversation, one of the students called writing a uniquely human tradition, which I thought was really important and a cool observation. When it came to personal use, they mainly talked about things like shopping on a budget, forming a skincare routine, practicing Spanish, were some of the answers I got. Nobody disclosed any use that might be potentially embarrassing, but that's to be expected. So no one talked about therapy, for example. Once I heard their answers and shared my thoughts on them, I shared the questions that I ask myself when I engage with the technology and just pitched to them as if it's useful, go with it, feel free to discard what isn't. First thing I posed to them was, am I capable of evaluating the output? Which to me is another way of saying, can I do the work without the technology? And if I can't, then I need to learn more about it, because if I can't assess whether it's giving me good material to work with or not, then the use is problematic and I can't guarantee that it's ethical. From there, another question I ask myself is, what role am I asking the Gen AI to perform, and is that role problematic? So, say you're asking it to give you feedback as though it were a writing coach or a writing tutor, versus say, I want you to act like my therapist or my doctor or my lawyer, or act like a student, for example. Third question I posed was, how would the person I'm writing to or about feel if they knew AI was part of my process? One of the things that I posed to them as a hypothetical example, thank you, Michelle, um, was the fact that as someone who works with dozens of students a semester, I work with people who are going through tough things in life, maybe the loss of a loved one, a bad accident, an illness. And I have to respond to them, show empathy, and work with them and set up accommodations. And sometimes the things they disclose are really difficult to respond to. That's a skill I've had to develop as an instructor, like many of us have. And so I said to them, how would you feel if I just gave it to ChatGPT to craft a response because I didn't feel comfortable messing with it and just wanted to knock it out? Would that change the way you perceived the feedback you got from me? And then lastly, is this something I can do on my own or figure out on my own without consuming the energy of an AI search? Are there other tools available for me? Say, can I just use Duolingo if I want to work on my Spanish versus using one of these platforms? From there, I created an exercise designed to help them see the limitations of the tool. Specifically, I didn't want them to use ChatGPT or other platforms like it for the homework, because that's where they're developing their analytical skills, testing out their knowledge of concepts. And it's a way for me to determine, what do I need to focus on more? What concepts are harder for them to master? So if they just outsource it to a machine, then I don't know what I need to focus on. So what I did was I pulled up ChatGPT in class and gave them a prompt to copy paste into it and just assess how good of a job it did. So what I had the platform do was take the textbook for the class and one of the readings that we worked on, which was Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech, and write an analysis of the speech using concepts from the textbook. So the students put the prompt in there, got the output, and then had to reflect on, what did it do well, what was a weakness. And here's what they got. They generally said that ChatGPT was good at just analyzing the speech in general. One of them pointed out this is probably because a lot of students have had to analyze this speech at some point, so the platform just had a lot of material to draw from. But they noted that it fell short really significantly when it came to applying concepts from the textbook. It just straight up fabricated information because there's less writing about the Performing Prose textbook online. So one student got this sentence: his rhetorical choices serve two prominent motives outlined in Performing Prose, clarity and energy. And as it happens, neither of those are actually motives in the book. So a student wouldn't know it was accurate unless they checked the output. So a common conclusion the students came to was that the tool's only effective if you know how to prompt it and you can explain the material. So it can't substitute for the rigor of actual learning. From that, I developed some concepts that I use to mitigate the poor use of GenAI with students. I think that exercise demonstrates some of them, but there were others I brought in as well. I try to emphasize source integration in my essay rubrics and the structural design of the course. These platforms are not good at taking quotes from one book and applying them to another because that's a more creative skill. You need to have an in depth knowledge of both texts to put them together in an essay. So if you emphasize that, you'll see some of the weaknesses in the platform um, in any poorly used or AI generated papers. Another thing I try to do is use a lot of in-class writing exercises. So it's low stakes. The students don't have any incentive to cheat because they're already in class. They're not being graded on how polished something is. And I get a sense of what their actual voice sounds like, which I can juxtapose with writing they do outside of class. Another thing I try to do is test student knowledge of concepts in discussion and open note exams. One of the easiest ways to catch poor use is just to have them explain things in class on the fly and put them in situations where they can't rely on the technology. That relates to my last point, which is demonstrating awareness of GenAI use outside of class without a focus on punishment. So in this class, for example, we had a test on sentence analysis, and I would get homework responses from them that were along the lines of, oh, this sentence has an adjective clause connected to a participial phrase, which is modifying this noun over here. And then when I would talk to them in class, I get questions like, can you explain what an adverb is? And so I realized some of them were probably using the platform to do the homework. And so what I said was, the answers I'm getting in your responses are more proficient and demonstrate a quicker mastery than what I'm seeing in class when we practice together. I'm assuming that you might be using this technology maybe just to check your work. If that's all you're doing, that's totally fine. But if you're not actually doing the homework, you're not going to get a good grade on the exam because these are concepts you have to apply in different contexts. It's not stuff you can regurgitate. And they got the message on that, and it worked pretty well. The last thing I want to cover is how I gave them guidance on how to incorporate GenAI technology effectively to revising a major paper they were working on. The major paper of the class is based on a paper they've written earlier, so it's already a revision exercise. So I gave them some of the elements of structured prompting and kind of walk them through why each of these are important. The first thing you want to do with structured prompting is establish a clear role for the AI to assume. So you want to say you're an instructional designer, you're a writing tutor, you're a peer editor, because that's going to give it an ethos that will filter the feedback you get. The next thing you want to do, and this is the hardest, is to provide clear and concise instructions that break down what you're asking for into subtasks. This is called chain of thought prompting. And the way I explain it to my students is, imagine you're making a wish with one of those genies that's trying to turn your phrasing against you, where you just have to be as clear as possible so you get your wish and not what you didn't ask for. From there, you want to give it examples or context using few-shot prompting that demonstrate a range of approaches. So instead of just saying, write a sentence for me, I have them draft a couple of sentences that take different strategies to, say, introducing a topic or establishing an argument. And then that will help the AI ground things in your voice and give you feedback that's more directly tied to your specific purpose. I also tell them to provide any logistical considerations like length, format, or style to shape the output. And then from there, what they have to do is continue to evaluate and adjust the output from the platform as needed so that they're staying in control of the process and engaged actively with what's going on. So here was the structured prompt I gave them to use for their papers. Assume the role of a writing coach or tutor for a college-level English course that focuses on rhetoric and composition, specifically stylistic analysis. I am going to upload my thesis statement in 2 body paragraphs from my essay. Evaluate the following components of the paragraphs based on the criteria listed for each. In each response you provide, focus on one element at a time, topic sentences, source integration, transition, etc., and do not move on to the next until prompted. So I found that AI works better with smaller writing tasks than larger ones. And so that's why I'm trying to have the students break up what it's requesting so they can focus on things one at a time. The last part of it was provide no more than two alternatives for any sentence you identify that could be improved, and ask no more than 2 to 3 questions to prompt reflection on my part. Do not offer alternatives or follow up questions until things have been resolved. And so I had mixed results with this. I think that ultimately the thesis statement in 2 body paragraphs was a limiting factor. The students reported that sometimes when it was focusing on concision, it would take out key information from what they were trying to convey in their argument. So they had to wrestle with it a little bit more. But I did find that the ways they continued to interact with the platform stayed critical. They gave me some advice on how to maybe refine the prompt in the future. And so, even though the results weren't quite what I was hoping for this first time around, I do have some good feedback from them that I can use to continue to refine this for future sections. Again, I also want to reiterate that most of these students are invested in becoming writers as English majors. So that their interaction with the technology is probably going to be different than folks in other disciplines who don't see this as a major part of what they want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and end there and give you all some time to pose questions. If any of you are working on a writing intensive course or setting up writing assignments for one of your classes, you're more than welcome to reach out to me at my email and set up a meeting. I'd be happy to work with you.
All right. Thank you, Matt, for your presentation. I will stop the recording, then we can start the Q&A.